Sails were damaged. Those that were up and had not been furled were damaged. Aside from that, there was no real structural damage to them.
What could make an entire crew abandon a perfectly good ship in the middle of the open ocean without a trace? How does a fully stocked and intact seaworthy vessel end up drifting silently with no one left aboard?
It was not leaking. The sails were damaged. Those that were up and had not been furled were damaged. Aside from that, there was no real structural damage to the boat.
Mary Celeste's mysterious case. Finally solved, the mystery of the Mary Celeste has puzzled people for over 150 years. A strong ship was drifting with no crew, no signs of violence, and untouched cargo. Many theories, from pirates to supernatural events, tried to explain it, but none fully made sense. In 2025, a major discovery near the Azores brought new clues, revealing the lifeboat and remains that finally shed light on what may have caused the crew's tragic fate. Using modern technology and science, researchers pieced together a heartbreaking story of fear, quick decisions, and the unforgiving power of the ocean. On December 4, 1872, the crew of the Dei Gratia, a British sailing ship, noticed something strange about 400 miles east of the Azores. As they looked closer, they realized it was another ship, the Mary Celeste, slowly drifting along with only a few sails up. It seemed almost lost, as if it were moving without a clear purpose. Feeling that something was not right, Captain David Morehouse decided to send a few of his men to investigate. As they climbed aboard, a deep sense of unease settled over them. The ship was completely empty. There was no captain, no crew, and not a single sign of life anywhere. Only silence surrounded them. They found that the cargo hold was still packed with 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol. Not one barrel had been touched. In the galley, meals were prepared as if someone had been ready to sit down and eat. In the cabins, clothes hung neatly, just as if the owners had stepped out for only a moment. However, one important thing was missing. The lifeboat was gone. Even though the ship looked abandoned, it was not sinking. Yes, some water had collected inside the hold, about 3 feet deep, but the ship's pumps were still working. The Mary Celeste remained strong and ready to sail. When the crew checked the ship's logbook, they found that the last entry had been made 10 days earlier, on November 25th. At that time, the Mary Celeste had been close to Santa Maria, one of the Azores Islands, and everything had seemed normal. There were no signs that anything was wrong. This discovery raised a chilling question. What could have made 10 people, Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and 7 trusted crew members, suddenly leave a perfectly fine ship right in the middle of the vast ocean? The scene was so unsettling that the men from the Dei Gratia could not shake the feeling that something terrible must have happened. Deep down, they knew that Mary Celeste was hiding a dark and tragic story. After the discovery, salvage crews decided to tow the Mary Celeste to Gibraltar. Once there, a court hearing was set up to try to figure out what had happened. Investigators looked closely at every part of the ship, but what they found only deepened the mystery. There was no blood anywhere, no signs of a fight, and nothing appeared to have been stolen. The ship seemed almost untouched by violence. The barrels of industrial alcohol were still in place, just as the cargo list had described. However, later reports mentioned that a few barrels had shown signs of leaking. As word spread, theories began popping up quickly. Some people believed pirates might have attacked. Others thought maybe there had been a mutiny where the crew turned against Captain Briggs. However, the court could not find enough proof to support either idea. The strange, empty feeling of the ship only made people even more suspicious. It is chilling to imagine standing on that silent deck, with the cold wind blowing, and knowing that a full crew had once been there, but had completely vanished. This event was real, unlike the made-up ghost stories often told around campfires. The Mary Celeste had been a strong and reliable ship. She was built in Canada, registered in America, and had a history of successful voyages before this strange trip. The ship set sail from New York on November 7th, heading toward Genoa, Italy, carrying the load of alcohol. Everything appeared normal at the start of the journey. Yet something had gone terribly wrong somewhere along the way. Even today, historians still wonder why Captain Morehouse and his men did not see any distress signals from Mary Celeste. It raises many questions. Did the crew leave the ship in a hurry because they panicked? Or was there simply no time to send any signals at all? All the small details suggest that whatever happened must have struck suddenly. It was not a slow build-up, but a split-second decision that turned a proud ship into a lonely mystery, drifting in the middle of the sea. As the mystery of the Mary Celeste is explored deeper, one important question naturally comes to mind. What could have frightened an experienced captain and his trusted crew so badly that they chose to abandon their ship in the middle of the open ocean? It was not a decision they would have made lightly. Mary Celeste's mysterious case has finally been solved. It is important to get to know the people on board to truly understand what might have happened. Their backgrounds and stories shed light on the human side of this tragedy and make the events that followed feel even more personal and heartbreaking. So, before uncovering the dark ending, it makes sense to take a moment to meet the people behind this mystery. Learning about who they were brings their fate much closer to home and makes the story of Mary Celeste even more powerful. The Mary Celeste was more than just a ship sailing across the ocean. It was a moving home for 10 people whose lives were sadly caught in one of history's greatest mysteries. Leading them was Captain Benjamin Briggs, a man of 37 years from Massachusetts in New England. Briggs was no beginner when it came to the sea. He had been working on ships since he was a teenager, learning everything about sailing and leading with a calm and steady hand. People who knew him spoke of his strong discipline and deep faith. As a devoted Christian, he was known for staying calm under pressure and making wise decisions. However, this voyage was not just another work trip for Briggs. It was something more personal and special. He had brought his wife, Sarah, and their young daughter, Sophia, who was only 2 years old. Sarah, who was in her early 30s, was no stranger to life at sea. She had often traveled with her husband on earlier voyages, showing her strength and support. Sophia's presence added a warm and tender feeling to the ship. Later, little toys belonging to the toddler were scattered around the captain's cabin, reminding everyone of the small child who had once played there. In addition to the family, the rest of the crew consisted of experienced and trusted sailors. Captain Briggs carefully chose them, each bringing valuable skills needed for a safe and successful journey across the wide Atlantic. Among the crew, the first mate was Albert Richardson, an American with a strong reputation for his skills at sea. He had sailed with Captain Briggs before, which showed their trust level. Alongside him was the second mate, Andrew Gilling, a young man from New York with Danish roots. He was energetic and eager to prove himself on this important voyage. The ship's steward was Edward Head, who also took on the role of cook. His job was to keep the men well fed and cared for during the long journey. Then there were the 4 hard-working deckhands. Volkert and Arian Martens, both from Germany, were joined by Gottlieb Godschall and Lorenz. All of them were in their 20s, strong, capable, and dependable. These crew members were not random sailors picked at the last minute. Captain Briggs personally selected each one based on their skills, experience, and trustworthiness. This showed how much he valued having a reliable team by his side. What stands out the most is just how normal everything seemed. Captain Briggs even wrote letters back home, sharing his excitement about showing Sarah and little Sophia the world's wonders. The crew had signed on in New York, expecting nothing more than a regular journey to Italy. There were no warnings of trouble ahead. Everything pointed toward a smooth and safe trip. Captain Briggs even carefully decided to leave his older son, Arthur, with family, planning to return safely once the voyage was complete. Yet, despite all the planning and experience, something went terribly wrong. Personal belongings like clothes, pipes, and even a sewing machine were found left behind on the ship, almost as if everyone had expected to come back shortly. It raises a heartbreaking question. Here was a family man, a trusted crew, and a sturdy ship. So what could have possibly forced them to leave everything behind so suddenly? Were they desperately escaping from danger, or were they chasing a small chance to survive? The story of the people on the Mary Celeste is not just a small detail in history. It is the heart of the entire tragedy. Their lives and sudden disappearance make this mystery so powerful and unforgettable. Understanding their story helps explain why so many wild ideas came up in the following years. For more than 100 years, the sight of the Mary Celeste floating empty on the open sea kept people guessing. Right after she was found, many pointed to the idea of piracy. Back then, the Atlantic Ocean was no stranger to dangerous raiders and pirates, who often attacked ships for their goods. But there was a big problem with that theory. Nothing on the Mary Celeste had been stolen. The cargo, those 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol, was still neatly stored in the hold. Pirates would not go to the trouble of killing or kidnapping a crew and then leave behind valuable goods without taking anything. Another idea suggested that there had been a mutiny. Maybe the crew turned against Captain Briggs, fought him, and fled. But again, this theory did not fit. The ship was spotless. There was no blood, no broken equipment, and no signs of any kind of struggle. During the hearings held in Gibraltar in 1873, investigators quickly dismissed the idea of mutiny because there was simply no evidence to support it. Some people thought it was even bigger. They believed it might have been an inside job, like insurance fraud. After all, Captain Briggs and Captain Morehouse of the Dei Gratia knew each other. Maybe they had worked together to pull off a trick for money. But when investigators looked closer, the truth did not add up. The amount of money involved was small, and no experienced captain would risk his ship, his family, and his crew for such a little reward. Other theories went deep into the world of imagination. Some said a giant squid had attacked the ship, pulling the crew into the sea. Others thought a powerful waterspout, a type of sea tornado, had hit the ship and thrown everyone overboard. These ideas were exciting to hear, but they had no real proof behind them either. While these wild ideas were fun to imagine, no real evidence supported them. Even the famous Bermuda Triangle was mentioned, even though Mary Celeste had been nowhere near that area when she disappeared. After many strange theories, a more serious and grounded idea emerged. In the year 2006, Dr. Andrea Sella at University College London decided to run an experiment. He suggested that the barrels of alcohol on board might have leaked fumes into the closed spaces of the ship. Over time, the fumes could have built up. Then, a sudden pressure wave explosion could have happened with just a small spark. There would not have been any flames, just a loud bang and a powerful rush of air moving through the ship. This theory made a lot of sense. Such an explosion could have scared the captain and crew into thinking the ship was about to catch fire or blow apart. they might have rushed into the lifeboat quickly, trying to escape the danger. The idea seemed even stronger because later checks showed some barrels were empty. However, no one could have proven this theory back then without today's technology. It is also possible that the crew thought the ship was seconds away from exploding sky high. In the middle of the vast and lonely ocean, that fear could push anyone to make a quick and desperate decision. Other ideas also floated around. Some people believed the leaking alcohol fumes affected the crew's minds, causing them to see things that were not real. Maybe they started hallucinating and jumped off the ship in confusion. Another thought was that an underwater earthquake shook the ship hard enough to frighten everyone into leaving it behind. Both of these ideas sound possible at first, but the ship's logbook showed that the weather had been calm, and the ship's structure remained strong and undamaged. On the other side, supernatural fans believed Mary Celeste was initially cursed. The ship had a history of bad luck, including accidents like crashes and a fire. Still, these ghostly tales sounded more like something shared around a campfire rather than serious explanations based on facts. The real truth is that every theory has a flaw. None could fully explain what happened. No bodies were found, no wreckage drifted nearby, and no distress signals were sent. The Mary Celeste remained behind, a lonely ship floating on the sea, carrying a riddle that no one could easily solve. For many years, people kept asking the same haunting questions. Did the crew of the Mary Celeste turn against each other? Or did they face something else entirely? Were they fooled by the forces of nature? Or were they simply unlucky? Guess after guess was made, but no one could find the full story behind the ship's eerie silence. Then, after more than 150 years of searching and wondering, the year 2025 brought a discovery that changed everything. Near the Azores, close to where the Mary Celeste was last seen drifting alone, a team of marine archaeologists from the University of Southampton made a breakthrough that completely rewrote the story. Led by Dr. Emma Thompson, this team was not just taking random dives into the ocean. They were equipped with the best modern tools available. Using advanced sonar systems and small remote-operated vehicles, often called ROVs, they explored deep underwater, where human divers could not easily go. The team spotted something incredible at a depth of about 300 meters in the cold and dark waters of the Atlantic Ocean. It was the lifeboat from the Mary Celeste, sitting quietly on the ocean floor, untouched for all these years. Just imagine the screens lighting up as they caught sight of this lost piece of history, a silent witness to a tragedy long forgotten. The lifeboat was not in perfect shape, but was not completely destroyed either. The wood showed signs of heavy wear. Some parts were splintered, and the edges were blackened and charred as if the boat had been through something violent and rough. After carefully pulling it up piece by piece, the team began a closer examination. That was when they found traces of industrial alcohol all over the remains, the very same type of alcohol that Mary Celeste had been carrying as cargo when she disappeared. When the team looked closer, they noticed burn marks on the lifeboat. These burns suggested there had been a sudden blast, not a slow-burning fire, which was an important clue. Also, the boat's markings matched perfectly with the design of the Mary Celeste, proving without a doubt that this lifeboat had come from that fateful voyage so long ago. Dr. Thompson's team shared their findings with the world in early 2025, and the news spread quickly. It was like a bomb had dropped in history and exploration. For the first time, there was real physical proof that something had gone terribly wrong with Mary Celeste. What made it even more surprising was how well the lifeboat had been preserved. With its freezing cold water and very low oxygen levels, the deep ocean had kept the lifeboat almost frozen in time. Normally, wood would have rotted away after more than 150 years. But here, every crack and every stain could still be studied carefully, allowing scientists to learn details that past explorers could only dream of. The traces of alcohol found on the lifeboat supported an old theory. Maybe those barrels of alcohol had leaked, filling the ship with dangerous fumes. Then, with just a tiny spark, a pressure wave explosion could have rocked the Mary Celeste. It would not have been enough to sink the ship, but it would have been terrifying enough to make everyone think they needed to escape immediately. It is easy to imagine Captain Briggs shouting urgent orders, the crew rushing to obey, and everyone scrambling into the lifeboat. They might have believed the entire ship was moments away from exploding. As the old saying goes, desperate times call for desperate measures. This discovery did not just reveal the location of a lost lifeboat. It gave something even more valuable, a reason why the crew abandoned the ship. The damage found clearly pointed toward an explosion, not pirates or sea monsters. This missing piece drew researchers closer to understanding the crew's final, desperate moments. However, scientists needed more than a broken lifeboat to complete the picture fully. They needed hard proof of what happened to the people themselves. What they found next would finally seal the story, but sadly, it would not be a happy ending. Once the team recovered the lifeboat, they did not stop by. They were just looking at burn marks. They decided to dig even deeper. Inside the broken and splintered wreck, they made a heartbreaking discovery. Human remains were found, still somewhat preserved by the freezing deep-sea waters. In March of 2025, a group of forensic experts began careful work on the remains. They pulled DNA from bones and teeth. This was not like a television crime show with quick answers. It was slow and detailed science, matching the DNA samples to historical records and distant relatives of the crew. When the results came in, they were devastating. The team confirmed the identities of Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, and at least 3 crew members, Albert Richardson, Volkert Martens, and Gottlieb Godschall. Among the remains was also little Sophia, their 2-year-old daughter, whose tiny skeleton made the discovery even more painful to accept. The DNA findings confirmed names and showed clearly that these people had been inside the lifeboat when everything went wrong. Combined with the earlier explosion evidence, the full story started to take shape. Back in 2006, Dr. Andrea Sella had already shown through experiments that leaking alcohol could create an explosion without fire, just a loud, terrifying bang. Now, the 2025 discovery matched that idea perfectly. There were alcohol traces and signs of a blast, but no burn marks on the main ship. It is easy to picture the moment. The crew might have seen a flash of light, heard a deafening roar, and believed the ship was about to explode completely. Captain Briggs likely made a quick decision, ordering everyone to abandon the ship and get into the lifeboat, hoping to either signal for help or find safety nearby. But here is where the harsh truth comes in. The condition of the lifeboat, cracked, broken, and burned, suggested it was not prepared for survival at sea. No supplies were found, no water barrels, no food, and no equipment. They had left the ship in a panic, not following a careful plan. Forensic analysis provided even more clues. The remains did not show signs of starvation or long-term exposure. Instead, the deaths seemed to have come quickly, most likely from the brutal cold. The Atlantic Ocean is unforgiving, with freezing waves and endless storms. This was no longer just guesswork. The DNA connected the crew to the boat to the explosion, and the explosion to their deaths. It gave a clear and cold explanation for a mystery that had stayed unsolved for so long. So what happened after they hurried into the damaged lifeboat? It is important to follow their trail, even though the truth is heartbreaking. Now, imagine this. 10 people were packed tightly into a small and damaged lifeboat. Behind them, Mary Celeste slowly disappears into the distance. It is late November in 1872. The Atlantic is rough, and these people have just fled what they thought was an exploding ship. Captain Briggs likely tried to guide the boat. Sarah must have been holding little Sophia close. The crew would have been rowing with everything they had, hoping to spot another ship or make it back to the Azores, about 400 miles away. But the harsh reality is that their chances were very slim. The evidence found in 25 showed they did not make it far at all. No nearby ships recorded any rescue, and no sightings of a lifeboat were ever reported. When the Dei Gratia found the Mary Celeste 10 days after the last log entry, the crew had been at sea alone for at least part of that time, but likely not for long. The mystery of the Mary Celeste is no longer a legend. The truth has finally surfaced, but the ocean still holds countless secrets. If you enjoyed this journey into one of history's greatest mysteries, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell for more stories that time almost forgot. What mystery do you think should be uncovered next? Let's talk in the comments.